Okay, so the question was the history of corporate personhood or corporate constitutional rights. This idea that somehow, I'm going to tell a story on how it came to be that large transnational corporations are not just exercising power. I'm going to tell the story on how it came to be that these unelected, unaccountable corporate CEOs are ruling us. As surely as masters once ruled slaves, as surely as kings once ruled subjects, unelected and unaccountable corporate CEOs are ruling us because they're making the public policy decisions for the rest of us. We get to choose between paper or plastic at the grocery store. We can choose between Coke and Pepsi. You can have 31 different flavors of ice cream. You know, you can get all sorts of consumer choices. But when it comes to actually participating in a meaningful way in the decisions that affect your day-to-day life, ask yourself, how often do you actually get to participate in that? From what language does the word democracy derive? Greek. Let's break it down. Demos means the people. Kratia means rule. Very good. And erudite. Crowd. Now, good job. The people rule. Quick pop quiz. How many folks believe we, the people, are ruling in the United States? Don't be shy. Look around. I'm not joking. Look around. There is not a single hand in this overfilling sanctuary. I do this presentation all across the country. Sometimes I do an afternoon presentation and an evening presentation. I did this presentation over 150 times last year. I'm on track to do it more than 150 by the end of this year. And when I ask that question, almost nobody raises their hand. It's about time that we recognize that the country that we thought we had, the country that we were taught that we had, the country that we want to live in is not the country that we in fact live in. That there really is a small ruling elite who are in charge of the big picture, and that is a difficult thing to come to terms with. But I say it's a good thing not so we can wallow in pity, but so that we can have some clarity about what we ought to do. That brings me to the next topic, which is sovereignty. Y'all, if I just had the word the sovereign on the board, who or what would you think of? Quick, honest, the sovereign. King. Almost everybody. Barbara said queen. I like that. But let's just acknowledge that for all of you, the word that everybody popped out, most of it was king. I did hear a queen, but it was all about royalty, right? And that's because the word sovereignty means the authority to rule. And the reason that the monarch or a monarch pops into your head, because I know your culture. I know that that most of you, I look around and I assume that most of you grew up here, probably went to school here and such. And so the word sovereign, you begin to equate with the king. That's because 500 years ago, the king was the sovereign. The sovereign was the king. Those words were synonymous. Where did the king claim his authority to rule? God. You don't get more legitimate. So when people tell me, oh, you can't amend the Constitution, that's too hard. Or we can't end war as foreign policy. Or we can't guarantee health care as a fundamental human right. Or we can't make the kind of changes that you all know in your hearts is what we should be doing, and in our heads you're wondering, why can't we do it? See, when people tell me we can't make those kind of changes, I think, have you not been paying attention?
Preach, Mr. President.
I mean, for real, y'all. I mean, the kind of changes that have been made in world history, the kind of changes that have been made in U.S. history around profound power dynamics, those changes have been made because people were willing to roll up their sleeves and make them. Another way to say that, folks, is, and now the Texans don't get metaphysical on y'all. You ready? We are all individually participating in creating our shared collective reality. Another way to say that is, if enough people think that something is true, if enough people act like it's true, it's true. It becomes true. We are creating our reality. So if it is true that the United States of America is basically a racist, sexist, a class oppressive society, and it is, then maybe we ought to start thinking differently. Maybe we ought to start acting differently. Maybe we ought to start acting like we've got the power to change it. Maybe we ought to start acting like that situation is a crisis that needs to be changed. You know why we should start acting like that? Because it is. We are in a crisis. And that actually brings me to the next topic, by the way, which is legal personhood. Please note that I did not write corporate personhood because I want you to really understand that the very concept of legal personhood merely means the ability to assert rights. And since we're talking about legal personhood, I'm saying the ability to assert rights under law. And saying it that way, isn't it obvious that the question of who is a legal person has been one of the fundamental questions in this country? Hell, it wasn't just a question, it was a struggle. Who gets to be a person and who can assert rights under our legal system, our political system? This has been one of the fundamental struggles. Right?
Amen.
Now, the last topic on the board is the corporation. Since I think this word is equally important, I will ask the same question. From what language is the word corporation derived? It's from Latin. Let's break this one down. Corpus means body. And now for extra credit, the suffix tion in Latin, it just means to have or create. So literally the word corporation means to have or create body. And in this sense I mean physical body. Because that we are taught in law school, and by the way, are there any lawyers in the crowd besides me that would admit it? I got several hands. So I will ask my sisters and brothers at the bar if you remember what I remember, and that is being taught that a corporation is a legal fiction. Yep, for sure. Yep. Right, so in fact for lawyers that's a concept that we're taught very early and we learn to understand. Corporation is legal fiction. Because watch this, even if you weren't subjected to law school, and believe me, it is being subjected, but if you just heard the phrase that a corporation is a legal fiction, even if you couldn't precisely define it, but honestly, y'all, if you've heard that a corporation is a legal fiction, raise your hand. For real. Look at that, always. Half the hands have just gone up in the room, right? So a corporation is a legal fiction. Corporation is a legal fiction. It's a legal fiction. My friends, that begs the question, what does the word fiction mean? Not real, made up. We are taught, I was literally taught in law school by my corporations teacher, day one, look, a corporation does not actually exist in the physical world, but we will pretend like this group of individuals and the material resources that are being assembled and the contractual obligations that are being made and all the various cultural assumptions that are associated with it, this very incredibly complex, abstract sort of set of things, we're going to pretend like it's one thing so we can treat it a certain way under law. And remember, if enough people think that something is true, if enough people act like it's true, it's true! Poof! We create a corporation because a corporation is a construct. It is constructed by the social, legal, cultural situation because people need it or want it to be done. And the word corporation is from Latin because the first corporations ever created by the genius of human creativity were created during the Roman Republic. Not, by the way, during the Roman Empire. And sometimes I wish we spent more time asking, what happens when a republic devolves into an empire? Because that might be an important conversation in the United States today. Just saying. But you see, the Romans created this thing called a corporation as a construct for a reason. For example, y'all heard the phrase, all roads lead to Rome? Yeah, here it is, 2,000 years later, we still say that. That road system was built and operated not only by, but as a corporation. Likewise, the aqueduct system, that amazing bit of engineering that moved water all across the Italian peninsula without electricity. Quick parenthetical. It just makes me so happy to know how clever humans are that we can do something like that. And honestly, you can't name a problem that I can't tell you the solution to if you give me 15 minutes and access to the internet. At one very real level, all of our problems are actually political problems because we don't have the political wherewithal, power, ability to implement the solutions that actually exist. But check this out. Not only was the aqueduct a corporation, so too were the first universities in the hospital. Corporation. Quick pop quiz. What is a road system, a water system, a university, a hospital? What do they all have in common? They're all public. Everything I just said serves the public interest. The genius of the idea of a corporation is to take private money, material, and resources, organize it on a voluntary basis, and put it to public use. See, unlike standard government that just taxes and does public things, the genius of the corporation, whether it was a non-profit corporation that you were just asking a donation, or a for-profit corporation that you were offering a return on investment, the genius of the idea of the corporation was to take private money, material, and resources, find ways to allow it to organize voluntarily, and then originally always to put it to public use. And I've said it a couple of times, and I'll say it again explicitly. This is a genius idea. I mean, just a way to help to facilitate certain projects, that's a genius idea. David Cobb and George Friday are not anti-corporation. The Move to Amend Coalition is not anti-corporation. And don't let that, that's something very important to us. Because you see, the idea in principle of just helping to facilitate voluntary people coming together and doing public things, this is brilliant. Of course, the problem is that the modern transnational corporation doesn't exactly operate that way, does it? That's because the modern transnational corporation, as we currently understand it, actually comes out of the 14th and 15th century of Europe. You know, the age of discovery. I have to put discovery in quotation marks because what, after all, did the Europeans discover in the 14th and 15th century? Africa, Asia, later North and South America. Newsflash! There were people living there! They were not lost. They did not need to be discovered. And so, in the same spirit of courageous truth-telling, let's just acknowledge that the 14th and 15th century of Europe was actually the age of rape and pillage and plunder and murder. For me, there's one word that actually sums that up. That's the age of empire. See, that's what imperialism means. It means beating people down. It means stealing their things, including their very bodies. And there is nothing romanticized about that. There is no way that you can talk about that in any way, except, if you're going to be honest about it, except to acknowledge it is brutal. It is oppressive at its very core. And the whole idea of the corporation, it didn't just accidentally get created during the age of empire. Stay with me, folks. The modern transnational corporation, as we understand it, was created as an intentional and deliberate instrument of empire. They were called joint stock companies. And one of the most famous of the original corporations, known as a joint stock company, was the East India Company. Literally designed to facilitate this military conquering and subjugation of the entire subcontinent of India. And not only to conquer their bodies, but to colonize their minds, to make them think different things, and to force those people who had heretofore been creating their own society and institutions to create whole new institutions so that their entire lives would revolve around stealing the natural resources of their own land and sending it to the shareholders of the East India Company as profit. And my friends, since I told you I was going to tell a story, and I finally got around to the United States of America in my story, let me now ask this question. How many colonies in the original founding of the United States of America? Come on, y'all, this is a gimme. Y'all know this. 13. Good. So since I asked such an easy question, here's the real hard question. Of those 13 colonies, how many of them were corporations? Nicely done. It was a trick question, but the answer is all of them, because the word corporation means to have or create body, and I'm telling y'all, it took the king to give body to every one of those colonies. The king created Massachusetts. Now somebody in the crowd might be saying, no, Massachusetts was already there. The king didn't just poof create Massachusetts. But my friends, that's why it's a trick question. The land was there, to be sure. The people, the river, the stream. You know, physical reality was there, but it took the king to create Massachusetts. And the king created Massachusetts by the use of a very particular legal instrument. Do you know what that instrument is called? Charter. Nicely done, a charter. To illustrate how the king would use a legal instrument known as a charter to create a colony or a corporation, we'll do another little exercise together. In this exercise, I will be the king, Why do y'all think I might be the king? I'm telling y'all, it matters. And now, Ben, it'll be good to sit with you. You said, I'm going to make you a governor. Watch this. I, the king, with all political power and nothing more than a writing instrument and a piece of paper, will now create Massachusetts. But of course, I'm not going to bother with administering Massachusetts on the day-to-day. After all, I'm the king. I've got other people to rape and pillage and plunder and murder. Apparently, these are kingly duties at this era. So instead, I will create Massachusetts, but will assign a royal governor. And now, my friends, I will quote from the actual original charter that created Massachusetts. I, the king, create Massachusetts, but assign a governor the responsibility, and this is a direct quote, to plant, to rule, and to govern this new area on my behalf, on behalf of the king, and to benefit me, the king, and to benefit the other shareholders of the joint stock company known as the Massachusetts Bay Trading Company. Massachusetts began as a for-profit corporation on the exact same principles that the East India Company engaged upon, which was to steal the resources and take them back as profit. So too was the state of Virginia wasn't the state of Virginia, it was the Virginia Company. The Providence and Rhode Island Plantation was a corporation. Hell, Georgia was a penal corporation, worked by slaves. Quick pop quiz. What skin color did the original slaves of the penal corporation know as Georgia have? White! I'm telling you, I wish more white people would really do just a little bit of examination around race and how it's been used to bamboozle us. To make us think that, well, boss man may have his boot on our neck, but hey, at least we white. I'm telling y'all, man, it is really important if we start to actually ask this, and guess what? Then we'll realize, oh my God, I've got so much in common with these other people who may have different pigment than I do. And that there are so many of us who are just sort of oppressed or otherwise exploited working class people. This notion matters. But the point is, my friends, that in this scenario, we would not in contemporary times call Ben a royal governor. In contemporary times, what I just described, what word would we maybe describe Ben? What would we call him? CEO. A CEO! You know, another way to say this, folks, is the American revolutionaries were not calling for a more socially responsible king or more socially responsible royal governors. Perhaps we might raise our expectations as well. That is, after all, our historic legacy. Because the American Revolution and the events that preceded it, especially, by the way, the Boston Tea Party, and sometimes I wish the Tea Party patriots would also do just a quick second of history and recognize that the Boston Tea Party was actually an act of nonviolent civil disobedience. That's our history. And by the way, do you think that those Boston patriots just rushed off and threw all the tea out of all the harbor of all the ships into the harbor that night? No, they targeted one corporation. East India Company. I'm telling y'all, man, this idea of people being willing to stand up against oppressive economic institutions, that is our historic legacy. And it's, yeah, you can applaud that. The American revolutionaries weren't calling for a more socially responsible king. Actually, there was a time, just 10 years before the revolution actually broke out, that those same people who would become revolutionaries, 10 years before, they were writing letters to the king that went like this: "Oh, Father King, we, your humble children, come before you on bended knee to beg that you intervene on our behalf, because your royal governor is administering unfair laws, unfair business and trade laws." And it wasn't just taxation without representation. The real complaint, unfair business laws that the English Parliament are making that are benefiting the created monopoly known as the East India Company. Quick pop quiz, my friends. Does anybody want to guess what percentage of the English Parliament making those laws actually actually owned shares in the East India Company? 100%. I wonder if that's related, y'all. Oh, Father King, we come to beg that you intervene on our behalf, O Mighty One. It was the most sniveling, groveling language you can imagine. And I don't know about you, but I am keenly interested in knowing what was it that convinced those people to stop the boot kissing, to stop the groveling and the begging before power and authority, to actually, and it didn't work. Sort of like today. And instead, to get up off their knees and to stand up, and to stand up straight. And as King would say, in a different era, find some steel for their backbones. Put their shoulders back. Hold their head up high. Look directly at the king. You know, the king who had cultural authority from God. And see behind the king the most powerful military the world had ever seen and said, "You're done. Get out. We're going to do it different now." Because let me tell you something, folks, that process is magic. And I want to be clear, if just one person stands up against injustice and oppression, that is courageous and it deserves to be applauded, but it's not magic. You see, to really invoke the magic, it requires one person to be able to stand up against injustice and oppression, but then have somebody to her left stand up, and somebody to her right stand up, and you have a collective standing up together, and at that point, that's the magic of a social movement. At this point, may I say, may the goddess bless the Occupy movement. The question is, in what year did the U.S. Constitution become ratified as the supreme law of the land?
1789.
Nicely done, 1789. The reason I want that date on the board very specifically is because this is the date the U.S. Constitution becomes the supreme law of the land. And now that we know and remember what legal personhood means, the ability to assert rights under law, who gets to be a legal person? Who was part of We the People in 1789? White people. Is it all white people? Only white men. Is it all white men? White men. My gosh, that's a lot of qualifications. In fact, anybody want to tell me or guess what percentage of the adult human beings living in 1789 in those states actually had rights under this Constitution?
10%.
10%? 20%? Charleston, West Virginia? 1%. That's a great mean. I will say this. Those of you who said 10 and 20%, you were not sufficiently cynical. 1%, you're far too cynical. The answer is 5%. Think about that for a moment. 5% of the actual adults could actually claim personhood status. Another way to say this is that for all this beautiful rhetoric, and it is beautiful rhetoric, but in its implementation, it was a founding violence against the indigenous who were already here and subject to intentional deliberate genocide. This document is a founding violence against the Africans who were brought at the barrel of a gun and forced to build this country. This is a founding violence against the women who couldn't, look, it's not just that women couldn't vote. Women couldn't own property. Women were property by any reasonable explanation of that word. And it's a founding violence against most of the white men, because most of the white men were either indentured servants or at best second-class citizens. In fact, no less a historian than the late, great Howard Zinn, and may the goddess rest his soul. Howard Zinn said, probably the most important way to understand the story of the United States is as a series of struggles by actual human beings to be defined as persons with rights under our Constitution. That's so important, I'm going to say it again because I really want us to come to terms with what this means. Probably the most important way to really understand U.S. history is as a series of struggles by actual human beings to be defined as persons with rights under our Constitution. Now, somebody once, at a presentation like this, basically said, all right, Cobb, you got a scathing indictment about imperialism of 500 years ago, but hey, women can vote in this country now. We got rid of slavery. It's all good now, bro. To which I replied, au contraire, mon frere. It ain't all good now, bro. And I honestly think think a big part of the reason it ain't all good now is the operation of the most dominant institution in our lives today, and that institution is the transnational corporation. And so, since I've just outlined how our political and legal system is supposed to operate, and I hope this is helpful. Is this helpful to think about? Like our civil liberties, but also how laws are supposed to operate? It might help us to ask them, where would a corporation go? Before I put the corporation on the board, a quick little pop quiz. What does it take to form a corporation in West Virginia today?
One person.
One person, but you have to fill some paperwork out. And you have to have a filing fee. How much is that filing fee in West Virginia these days? About 100, 150? Does anybody know exactly? I guarantee you it's not much. In no state is it much. The point is, as long as you fill the paperwork out correctly and your check clears, do you know what the Secretary of State will do? Issue you a charter. Do you know what you can do with a charter in West Virginia today? Under the West Virginia Corporation Code, anything legally permissible, all lawful activity. Apparently, if you get enough money, you can do illegal things and get away with it. But the point is, even under the existing statute, it's just basically wide open. By the way, you know how long your corporate charter would last in West Virginia? Forever! That's a mighty long time. The point I'm making, my friends, is to understand the corporation as a construct. We don't even normally ask ourselves these questions about the most ubiquitous institution in our society, right? And now I'm going to take you back to 1789 and tell you what it once took to form a corporation in this country, not only in 1789, for basically the next 100 years. First, you had to get a bill introduced in the lower house of your state government, the State House of Representatives. And that paperwork had to be approved by a majority vote of the House of Representatives. But you're not through, because now your paperwork goes to the state Senate, who now have to approve it by a vote of at least a majority. And you're still not finished, because now your paperwork goes to the governor, and the governor has to be willing to sign it. My friends, does that sound like forming a corporation today? No. Of course not. What have I just described? What process? Lawmaking, legislation. Anybody besides me tried to get a law passed? Anybody besides me ever worked on a law? Lots of hands go up. Good. So y'all tell me, how easy is that? Listen, the political lift of passing a law is very high, as it should be, I believe. The point I'm making is there was a time in this country that to be granted the privilege of limited liability was a huge political hurdle. And get this, as you made the application, that's just the mechanics. To make the application, you had to identify a public need that was not being met by businesses that did not already enjoy the privilege of limited liability. And if you were given the privilege of limited liability, all you could ever do was satisfy that public need. And if you did anything else, any other kind of business, do you know what happened to your corporate charter? Revoked! Corporate charters were revoked merely for going what's known in Latin as ultra vires, or beyond the authority. And if you were given the privilege, and you notice I continually underscore the privilege, it is not a right to have limited liability. The privilege of limited liability, if you were granted it, do you know how long your corporate charter would last? 1 year, 5 years, 3 years, 7 years, until the project was done. But the point is, every corporate charter, by its own granting, had a limited time period. And at the end of that time period, limited liability evaporated. I mean, the business could continue, but that legal idea of limited liability evaporated. And even if you were in that narrow time period, even if you were doing a specific thing that you had been granted your corporate charter to do, if you ever did anything that violated the public trust, do you know what happened to your corporate charter? Revoked! Corporate charters were routinely revoked merely for acting outside the public interest. I want to ask you, honestly, y'all, is there a single one of the huge transnational corporations that would even be allowed to exist today? I mean, I'm not talking about small and mid-sized businesses, right? There are many businesses that would, this is not anti-commerce. There's lots of commerce that would take place because that commerce is benefiting the public interest, making goods and services available. That's a good thing. But the kind of rapacious rape and pillage of Mother Earth, the kind of spewing of toxics and poisons, the idea of blowing up mountains, be allowed. And now, folks, I'm so happy. So since we know that it takes an action of state government to create the corporate charter, we know that corporate charter can be used to hold the corporation subordinate and accountable. We know that the corporate charter describes the duties of what a corporation can do. And since I will say such a privilege should only be allowed to exist if at least it serves the public interest, isn't it obvious that a corporation should be here and under the democratic control of our mechanisms of a democratic republic? And so now, my friends, thank you for your patience. Because when the United States Supreme Court comes waltzing in, and in an act of supreme judicial activism, says, oh no, a corporation, 5 of us on the court are going to tell 300 million of you that we're going to tell you what your Constitution says. Even though the word corporation is never used in our Constitution, we're going to tell you that you now have to treat a corporation as if it's a person with rights. It perverts this whole framework. See, corporate constitutional rights, shorthand corporate personhood, is not just an illogical idea, which it is. Corporate constitutional rights is not just a stupid idea, which it is. Corporate constitutional rights is a linchpin for how the ruling elite has stolen our country from us. And as a lawyer, what particularly galls me, they use our legal system to justify it. Because, you know, I was so naive that when I went to law school, I actually thought that I was going there to help administer justice. Because I thought and was taught and actually believed that the courts were where you went for justice, and that justice, she is blind. She doesn't care what skin color you have, or your gender, or your ethnicity, or even how much money you have. Justice is the fair application of a set of laws. And it really makes me angry to know that the principles of a democratic republic, which I feel in my heart, I know is the way we're supposed to be living, that not only can we not do it, but they use our legal system to tell us we can't do anything about it. Well, I say, ya basta! Enough already! No! No! It is time for we the people to do what other Americans have done before us. To do the work that George Friday challenged us to do about what change means. We've got to do the work of getting together in communities where we have faith and trust in one another. We need to educate one another about our own history. We need to decolonize our minds. We need to stop being pragmatic and being told, just grovel a little lower, beg a little better, get down on your belly even more, and beg power, because frankly, that don't work, y'all. Even if it wasn't a disgusting, debasing practice, it doesn't even work. So here's the thing. George and I represent a multiracial, multi-coalition of groups and individuals called Move to Amend. Amend what? Amend our Constitution. To correct the egregious error that the court made. Because it's not just Citizens United. Anybody believe we had a functioning democratic republic before Citizens United? Don't be shy. Here's the thing, y'all. If we're going to do the work of amending the Constitution, and I commit myself to do it, y'all commit with us? Yeah. All right. Here's what it needs to be. We first have to abolish in its entirety the idea that a corporation has constitutional rights. May I be very clear, at Move to Amend, we don't believe any artificial entity has constitutional rights. Only living, breathing human beings have constitutional rights. Neither for-profit or non-profit corporations have rights. They can have privileges under law, but they don't have constitutional rights. Frankly, as some people say from a certain faith perspective, only God can endow His creation with constitutional rights. Sometimes wish the right would think about that. Just saying. The second demand we make is we have to abolish the equally odious, also illogical, also court-created illegitimate idea that money equals speech. Money is property. And the point is that campaign finance laws are a political matter. And there can be a disagreement about how to best do that, but it is inappropriate for anybody to be able to go into court and overturn a campaign finance law based on the fact that their wealth is not allowing them to shout over the rest of us. It's a political question. So here's the thing. Move to amend calls for two things. Because I don't want to just, like, too many people say, yes, just about money in politics. Get the money out of politics. But then the corporation can continue to overturn environmental health laws, public safety laws, worker protection laws, right? So we got to deal with the corporation, but I don't want to deal with the corporation only to be told, oh, but, you know, the Koch brothers, and for that matter, George Soros or somebody with super wealth can spend unlimited amounts of money in elections as a constitutional right. No. We got to deal with both of these. So here's the thing, as that comes around, it's an organizing petition because we're going to be in touch with you and we're going to share those names with Barbara and her colleagues. Number one. And so, as a result of that, if you want to join this movement, I hope you do. Like, honestly, if you don't want to join, just pass the petition. I won't be offended. I mean, I'll be surprised. But I won't be offended. But what I'm asking you, if you're going to join, and I hope you will, print legibly. So I want to be clear. We work with Greens, Democrats, Libertarians, Republicans. Principled Republicans are with us on this. So as this comes around, just know that what we're doing is building a movement, and we believe that we can actually win this. I guess what I wanted to conclude with is this. If we think about an important Venn diagram, if you know what that means, you know, I want you to consider the Tea Party. And what is the Tea Party basically angry about? Government. Government spending. The next other really big movement that seems to be like on the move in this country is going to be represented by this circle, and of course I mean the Occupy movement. And what's the Occupy movement angry about? Why, it's in their name, Wall Street. And so, as in every good Venn diagram, here's our intersection. The profound realization where Wall Street America has basically taken over the government and is writing laws that actually only benefit Wall Street. Saying it another way, that if you actually are willing to take out the very small but outrageously vocal minority of the Tea Party movement that are in fact racist and xenophobic, but they're a minority, y'all. They really are. They're just loud. They're just loud. If you take that group out, and honestly, if you take out the group of Occupy that is also a minority and very small that just wants to say, burn it down! they're just loud. They've got things on their Facebook. They're also a minority. You take those out, and oh my God, Occupy and the Tea Party are patriotic Americans trying to make this a functioning democratic republic. I think that's really important to recognize that move to amend, we are not an issue. We are about the principles of how our government are supposed to operate. There can be disagreement on policies, and they should be. But you don't have to agree with me on my position on war, or my position on healthcare, or my position on any other issue that we might have a disagreement in. If you can agree with me that we the people are sovereign in the United States of America and government cannot infringe upon the rights of a human being, but corporations don't have those rights, then we welcome you in to move to amend.
Right now, not just because of how arrogant Citizens United was, but the marriage, I use that word oddly, the marriage of Citizens United to our state rule. So now, it's not just racially profiled because you're African American and it's a Saturday night. Because it was way when I was in high school, it's like, if it's after such and such, you better be home. And culturally that's true in the African American community. But you know what got me spooky? When it became culturally true in the Latino and Hispanic communities. Right? You can't be driving, you better be careful. And now, don't look South Asian or Muslim, right? And don't have that peace thing on your car. And thanks to indefinite detention in NDAA, Barbara could go out for groceries and Mike's like, where's Barbara? And we don't see Barbara. Barbara ain't got no charges. Barbara didn't get no lawyer. Barbara didn't get no trial. She's just indefinitely detained. That's in the U.S. So now, because we all have a target on our back, It's about our collective survival, thrival, benefit. And that means we're all got something to gain. We're all in this together. So I'm really excited to be here tonight. If you're my age or older or younger and you find out that from cradle I've been conditioned to believe stuff that really is in my own best interest, that really doesn't fit my principles, that really makes a myth what is the history and the story of my country, it doesn't necessarily feel so good. But y'all all said you like change, so here you go. Here's how change works. I don't know if everyone can see this, but here's the deal. We've got status quo. Status quo is things are the same today as they were yesterday. Everything's cool, right? So all of these represent status quo. Then you get new information. New information could be anything. New information could be good or bad. New information could be, you know, Rita, you won the lottery, you're going to get $20 million. It's new information. New information could be, Jim, everything you know about your government is absolutely false and you've been living in illusion. Both of those are new information. When you get new information, then you reach a new status quo. So if you found out you just got $20 million, you're going to do something. Something's going to happen. Or let's say you found out not just that everything you've learned about the country that you're in is different and not quite right, but if you don't pay the light bill by 5 o'clock, you're going to be in the dark. You're going to do something, aren't you? So you're adjusting from that new information to a new status quo. This is where change happens. In other words, you're going to have a moment of chaos when you find out you've got a little bit of new money, a lot of new money. And you're going to have some chaos if you find out that you better pay the light bill by 5 o'clock, you'll be in the dark. And internally, when you take in something like everything I've been learning and assuming and sharing with my young people around me isn't really congruent with what I value in my life, it might create a little chaos. Now, what's the kicker about y'all saying you believe in change is that change only happens in chaos. Change only happens in chaos. Change is chaos. When you say, I want to be a change maker, I want to walk into the world to create change, you're saying, I want to make people crazy. I want to walk out and I want to make sure when you leave, you're like, ugh. Because that is when change happens. And when David said we're in a moment of crisis, which is opportunity, it also means we're going to deal with a lot of chaos. Now, what's good about that? What works about that, if you really want change, is to be conscious. Conscious. When you have conscious chaos, that means we are intent about moving into a period where we know we're going to create change. We've thought about and envisioned and measured the kind of change we want. We've talked about and negotiated and built relationships so that when the things go really crazy, we know what we're doing. When we came together in fall of 2009 in Marin, California, to found Move to Amend, did we know some chaos is coming down here? We knew it. We made some conscious decisions about what would happen when Citizens United decision was made and corporations flagrantly showed their ass. We knew there was some chaos coming. We also knew we wanted to win. We knew that moment of chaos meant we could renegotiate the social contract. Because I don't know about everybody in this room, but there is no U.S. social contract that has ever worked for this woman. Never. So in 50 years, this is the first time I'm like, yeah, I'm down. Because there's some meaning in here. Yeah, I'm about being in the chaos, but let's be conscious about it. One of our conscious decisions back then was, well, we got 11, 12 people in the room. Organizations like Program on Corporation Law and Democracy and Women's International League for Peace and Freedom and Independent Progressive Politics Network and the Progressive Democrats of America. Lots of great people were in the room. Only one person wasn't white. Guess who that was? So one of our conscious decisions was, we're going to do the work, but we can't found ourselves as a coalition because to win, we need everyone. Because we're talking about changing the blessed Constitution. We can't just do that with some of us. We need the magic of all of us. Standing up, linking arms, knowing your burden is my burden, your struggle is my struggle. You're winning, you're living, you're thriving. can't not do it right. We can't settle for what, uh-oh, wait a minute, I'm about to say the P word again. Back up. P word makes me scary, y'all. We can't settle for what's pragmatic.
Our movement is ascending. Now is the time to actually demand what we want. And we don't think it's enough to just get money out of elections. Yes, we got to do that, but if we're going to go through a constitutional amendment, let's actually go for a democratic republic and deal with both corporate constitutional rights and money as speech.